Nice to meet everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. We're going to be covering a bunch of security-related topics, so I decided to label the session Security 101, but we'll talk about containers. We'll talk about a bunch of our services as well. My name is Kunal Batra. My email is kbatra@amazon.com. And just a little bit about me to calibrate for any questions that you might have during this presentation or afterwards. I'm a senior developer advocate here at AWS. I've worked on a lot of different developer-focused verticals. If you have any questions on any of those, feel free to reach out to me. By far, the best way to get in touch with me is my Twitter handle at Kunal732, or you can also email me as well, kbatra@amazon.com. And now this is not related to the session material we're talking about today, but a big passion of mine is machine learning and computer vision. So you can see in the bottom left of that slide over there, built an app that lets you know whether the garage door is open or closed, taking advantage of one of our machine learning services. Another one that counts how many people are in line at the Shake Shack in Madison Square Park. So if you have any questions on any of that, again, feel free to reach me on Twitter or my email, kbatra@amazon.com. All right, so let's get started. There we go. Okay, so an introduction of what we're talking about today. So we're going to be talking about first, as soon as you sign up, one of the first things I want to mention over here is how to secure your root account. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about IAM. I know it's something that's been probably brought up a couple of presentations so far. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. From there, we're going to talk about the Security Hub, Guard Duty, Amazon Detective, the web application firewall, and then from there, we'll talk a little bit more about security with containers. But before we begin, I always love showing this slide of our foundation over here. This is the AWS global platform. So we currently have 24 regions with 76 different availability zones. And if you're not familiar with those terminologies, a region is an isolated physical location around the world where we essentially cluster data centers. And availability zones are logically connected data centers connected by low latency connections. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about right now is securing your root account. And this is something that I think is important when you first sign up with the AWS service. So I'm going to go ahead, and we're going to be doing this a bit during the presentation, switching back and forth from PowerPoint to the AWS console. So you can see not only what I'm talking about, but how you can actually do this yourself. So I'm going to just switch over to my browser over here. Let me see if I can get out of this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now we're in the browser. We're at the AWS console. And for those of you not familiar, when you want to access the console, you can just go to console.aws.amazon.com. And the first thing we're going to do is type in IAM over here for Find Services. Now, IAM is short for Identity Access Management. And in this first screen over here, the first thing I want to showcase is how to secure your root account. You can see over here the sign up link for your IAM user. This is a demo account that I just created for this presentation. So it says AWS Kunal Demo. You can customize that as well. But the main thing I wanted to showcase over here was these different practices over here that you need to follow to make it a green check mark so you follow the best security practices. The first thing over here it's going to mention is you want to activate your MFA on your root account. So this is your multi-factor authentication. Right now you can see it's grayed out, and this is because I'm not on my root account. I'm on a different IAM user. But if you are on your root account, first thing you want to do is activate that. The next thing is you want to make sure that you create different IAM users, and you want to use that instead of your root account. After that, you want to make sure that you use groups to assign permissions. You can assign permissions to individual users to access certain services, but that doesn't scale, right? You want to make sure that you use groups to assign those permissions for your users. And then after that, you can see that you can apply an IAM password policy. So I'll showcase this right now. And I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with some of these password policies, but through this, you can set what is the minimum password length you want for your users. 6 is definitely too small. I mean, I would increase that. You can also choose what type of requirements you need for your passwords. One uppercase, lowercase, excuse me. You want a number or do you want a non-alphanumeric character? You can require any of those. You can also set an expiration date. In this case, you can see over here the default is your password expire in 90 days. And then after it expires, you can choose one of a couple of options. Do you want to have the administrator send another password, or do you want to go ahead and let your users change their password? And then finally, you can also prevent password reuse. So in this case, you can say, remember the 5 previous passwords or 6 previous passwords, so they can't use any of those. So that is a quick showcase on securing your root account once you do become an AWS user. So let me go ahead and switch back into PowerPoint over here, and we'll go ahead and make this full screen again. Excuse me. Okay, so this is a great slide over here, just in case you want to take a screenshot. This is showcasing a lot of our AWS security services, and I'm not going to talk about each one of these, but what I do want to point out is we have these tenets on the top over here: identity and access management, detective controls, and so forth. And you can see a lot of these different services align to one of these. So I'm not going to go through all of these services, but I do want to talk about each of these categories here. So identity and access management, it helps you integrate AWS into your identity management lifecycle, and it's a source of authentication and authorization. So you can see any service related to that will be part of that category over there. And then detective controls, these provide guidance to help identify potential security incidents within your AWS environments. Now moving on to infrastructure and security protection, this helps you implement methodologies necessary to comply with the best practices, as well as meet industry or regulatory obligations. Data protection, this helps you implement appropriate safeguards that protect data in transit and at rest. And then the incident response helps you define and execute a response to security incidents. So with these different categories, you can see the different services that align to it. So in your head, if you know what type of category you're looking for, you can kind of reference this slide and over here and see what service makes sense for that. Now, this is part of the cloud adoption framework, and you can see that link in the bottom over there. That'll showcase our cloud adoption framework, and this is the security perspective of that. And it talks about these categories. It gives you a little bit more information why we divided it the way we did. So feel free to check that out. Yes.
It's Ron Gerber. Can you, just to make it a little easier, make sure you'll send me a PDF version of these slides that I can make available?
Of course.
That way people don't need to necessarily worry about writing down the URL or taking screenshots. I'll make that available in the next 24, 48 hours.
Of course. Yeah, right after this, I'll just send it over to you. Perfect. So this is the slide that kind of covers all of that. So make sure to reference that whenever you want to go ahead and access that PDF and whenever Ron posts that. So moving on, the next thing I want to talk about, and I know this is something that I'm sure you've seen in a couple of presentations today, but it's important, it's a core part of AWS over here. It's identity and access management. So with identity and access management, again, enables you to manage access to your AWS services and resources securely. It's a feature of your AWS account, and it's offered at no additional charge. And for the greatest security, you want to make sure you grant least privilege, which is granting only the permissions required to perform specific job tasks. So I'm going to showcase the slide over here. There's 3 or 4 over here. And then from here, we're going to switch over again to the console just to actually see how you can actually create a policy. So over here, the idea of this policy is you can see in this slide, I'm in my AWS account. I have this policy over here, this JSON policy. And I want to, essentially what I want to do is be able to access this S3 bucket. This S3 bucket is this green icon underneath it with the text webinar-kbatra-1. And the idea is I want to create a policy that lets my account be able to list the buckets and also get objects in the bucket. So you can see over here in this policy, we have this effect, which over here it says allow. And then from here it says allow, if you go down, these actions, list bucket, get object. And we want to allow it on this particular resource, which, you can also, instead of list bucket and get object specifically, you can also use this asterisk format over here to list other options and get other options, and I'll showcase that in a bit. But I recommend using the specific list bucket, get object, what you need for the task, nothing more. And then from here, this applies to this resource, right? So the bucket over here that we're talking about. So I'm just going to again switch over to the browser and showcase this. So we're again at IAM already, Identity Access Management. we're in the dashboard. Now I'm going to go ahead to policies. And from here, what we're going to do is create a policy. Now, there's a couple of ways you can create that policy. You can see the visual editor, which is what we're going to choose, or you can choose JSON, kind of like similar to what you saw on the slide. I like using the visual editor, so we can say, let's go ahead and use this. First thing we're going to do is choose a service. In this case, I want to go ahead and choose S3. So I'm going to select S3 for the service. Now the actions. Again, you want to make sure you choose only the actions that are required. Right, so over here we can say, we can click on list, which selects all 3 of the list actions, which is not what we want. So we're going to go down over here and we're going to say list bucket. Now for read, we're going to go down over here and then you can see there's a lot of read options over here. But we're going to do the option similar to what that JSON policy statement on that slide showcased and get object. So now we have that, and now we want to say what resource do we want to apply this to. We can see that there's 2 resources. It's asking us for the bucket and the object. So we're going to go ahead and say add ARN, and ARN stands for Amazon Resource Name. And we're going to put in our bucket over here. So the bucket is webinar-kbatra-1. So I'm going to put in that bucket name. And then for the object, I want it to work on all the objects. So I'm going to again say the bucket, so which is webinar-kbatra-1. And we'll put an asterisk there so we can apply this to all of the objects in that bucket. And now we're going to go ahead and click on review policy. From here, it's going to say what's the name you want to put on this. So I'm just going to say AngelBeat AWS bucket policy. And we're going to go ahead and create that policy. And now we have a policy over here that we can apply to a user to go ahead and have access to that bucket. And you can see in this JSON statement over here, it looks very similar to what that slide showcased. The only difference that you're really going to see over here is this item over here, SID Visual Editor 0. And this is just a name. You don't even need that. You can delete that out of here, just a name to make this look nice. And one thing I want to showcase here, if you are going to edit this in your bucket through JSON, if you do make a mistake, it'll showcase right away that something's wrong over here. So it lets you know whether you were creating this appropriately or not. So that is the policy. That's how you can go ahead and create that inside of the console. So let me go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint presentation here. And now the one thing to note is this is not only for users. You can also create these roles for services as well. And if you remember in that first slide of the presentation, showcasing how I built that app that lets you know whether the garage door is open or closed, that took advantage of another AWS service called SageMaker, which needed access to S3 for that training data, right? So I had to create a role so SageMaker can access and read data from an S3 bucket. So this works not only for users as well as applications and other services as well. Okay, so moving on, the next service here I want to talk about is Security Hub. So Security Hub is a relatively new service. It gives you a comprehensive view of your high priority security alerts and compliance status across AWS accounts. So with Security Hub, you have a single place that aggregates, organizes, and also prioritizes your security alerts and the findings from different AWS services. And we'll talk about some of these services in a bit. But it takes it from services such as GuardDuty, Inspector, Amazon Macie, and other partner solutions. So with Security Hub, you can run automated continuous account configuration and compliance checks, and we'll showcase some of those compliance checks and configurations in a second as well. And it takes some of the compliance checks from the Center of Internet Security. And let me showcase this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into the console. And I'm going to click on services here, and we're going to type in Security Hub. So we've loaded Security Hub in my console. It's loading up right now. And the first thing it's going to do once it loads up, it's going to give us insights. And you can see, because this is on my demo account and it's not on all my accounts, it's going to say it's not enabled on some accounts. But what I do want to showcase is some of the insights here. And I did mention this, the Center for Internet Security benchmarks here. So let's take a look at that right now. So you can see over here some of the issues with my account based on some of these benchmarks. My keys are not being rotated every 90 days. Ensure IAM password policy requires at least one uppercase. Policy requires at least one lowercase, similar to what I showed you before. So these are some of the things that Security Hub is seeing, and it kind of gives me this view where I can see everything together at once. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint presentation.
Hey, Kunal?
Yes.
Now, I do know that we're going to have one of your colleagues cover Security Hub in depth, Steve Woodard, at about 2:30. So I think these high-level insights is very useful, but maybe if you could, just to avoid overlapping content, spend some of the remaining 20 minutes more on some of the application and container-oriented security issues that might make everything new.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just going over a high-level view of those services, and then we'll go into the container portion a bit in the end. But yeah, it's nothing in-depth for any of these services, but all vital information. So the next feature I want to talk about is the guard duty, Amazon guard duty. And this is a pretty important feature. It's a threat detection service that continually monitors malicious activity, unauthorized behavior to protect your AWS account and workloads. And it does it in some interesting ways. And you can see in the slide over here, it has that one-click activation, so it's super easy to use. It's continuously monitoring your AWS accounts. You can see globally what's happening with your accounts, and you can put those results in a certain region. And it does two things that I find interesting. It detects known threats. These are threats based on intel from our AWS security team. It also detects threats based on behavior-based views as well. So we'll showcase that in a second. But it looks at three different data sources here. It looks at your VPC flow logs. It looks at your DNS logs. It also takes a look at your CloudTrail events. So your VPC flow logs, that's a feature that enables you to capture information about the IP traffic going to and from your network interfaces in your VPC. Your DNS logs are based on queries made from your EC2 instances to known and unknown questionable domains. And your CloudTrail events, it's a log of AWS API calls used to access the AWS Management Console and SDKs and more. So it takes a look at these services, and it goes ahead and does that analysis. So you can see over here, again, those data sources that it's going to be checking, the VPC flow logs, the DNS logs, the CloudTrail events. From there, it's going to try to do two different types of threat detection. Threat intelligence. So this is based on, again, intelligence coming from the AWS security team. And it has access to that feed, and from there, it tries to see is anything happening, such as Bitcoin mining, for example. Then from there, it also does anomaly detection. So in this case, it's checking for unusual user behavior. Anything that's out of the normal, right? And to get that ability to do that, it takes at least 7 to 14 days to create that baseline of looking at your account. And then once it gets that baseline, it's able to tell you, hey, this is anomalous. And then from there, you can get those findings and you can take action accordingly. It'll be presented in Security Hub. You can have that in the S3 buckets. You can also do CloudWatch events with that as well. So again, this can detect threat intelligence from various sources, again, from our AWS security team, also from AWS partners such as CrowdStrike and Proofpoint, as well as customer-provided intel. Okay, so let's move on to the next service over here, Amazon Detective overview. Now, Amazon Detective is another service, and it works well with guard duty. So it makes it easy to analyze, investigate, and quickly identify the root cause of potential security issues or suspicious activities. Detective automatically collects log data from your AWS resources, and it uses machine learning, statistical analysis, graph theory to build a linked set of data and visualizations to help you speed up your security investigations. So we do all the heavy lifting. We collect the log data from your AWS resources. We take that, extract important records, combine them into a single view. Then we present that in a time series fashion that you can use to power your investigations and reduce that time to respond. This information is stored for a year, so you can historically go back in time. And this is great for triage. So for example, let's say guard duty let you know something malicious might have happened through an alert. You can then look through the visual insights and determine if the suspected alert is truly malicious. And then also, you can also see, you can use detective to see which other systems were compromised based on the logs that are presented. So you can again see a little visual view of that. It looks at those three pieces of information: CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, and from there you can actually see this through your Security Hub or through guard duty as well, because it's integrated over there. All right, so we're moving on. Next one over here is the web application firewall. I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with this. But again, WAF stands for the Web Application Firewall. It's an application layer firewall used to protect web assets from various forms of attack. It's a server plugin or filter that applies to a set of HTTP traffic, rules to HTTP traffic. Another way to look at it is a security service providing protection by monitoring HTTP and HTTPS requests and restricting access to web applications. And you can see over here in this diagram, it works with three of our services: CloudFront, Application Load Balancer, as well as API Gateway. So you can go ahead and create those policies and then block and filter based on certain patterns and monitor that. All right, so I know this is something we already talked about. This is going to be more along the lines for containers, both for ECS and EKS for the shared responsibility model. And just really quickly, that shared responsibility model, there's that delineation, right? So our customers manage the security in the cloud while we manage the security of the cloud. And you can see that in these slides over here represented by that blue and orange delineation. So typically in this case, you can see that something we would manage is that compute, storage, database, networking regions, edge locations, we like global infrastructure is something we take care of. And then as customers, it's your responsibility to manage customer data, platform application management, and so forth. Now, when it comes to the managed container services, just really quickly to showcase here, we kind of break this down into, you can see this broken down to orchestration and compute engines. We have two of those services here. So we have ECS, which is our orchestration service. We also have a managed Kubernetes orchestration service, EKS. And you can have multiple compute engines for this, right? So you can have your own EC2, run on your own EC2 instances, or you can run that on our serverless compute engine here, AWS Fargate. There's also the Elastic Container Registry where you can store your containers. Now, when it comes to that shared responsibility model on ECS for EC2, you can see it's really similar to how that initial diagram I showed you, right? You have to manage things like the ECS agent, the container image, IAM for the app itself, and so forth. And then we'll again go ahead and manage the regions, availability zones, edge locations, etc. Now with Fargate, as you see, it changes a little now. When you're running Fargate, again, this is our serverless compute for containers. We run both the control plane and the data plane, and you can really focus in on your container images. And so EKS and EC2, this also looks pretty similar to ECS as well on EC2. So we talked a little bit about IAM, the identity access management, showcased it a little. But now when it comes to ECS and EKS, with ECS, all you really need to use and worry about is the identity access management. But for EKS, you need to understand both IAM and role-based access control. Which user or service account gets to carry what type of operation on what type of resource. And now for ECS as well, again, you need only to understand the AWS VPC and security groups, But for EKS, you need to understand and configure both the AWS side of things, the VPC security groups, as well as the Kubernetes network policies. So the main point here is in the slide, less is more. Put less in the image, which not only makes it smaller, so it pulls faster, but it gives it less of an attack vector or things within that container that can be exploited. No secrets in the image, one service per container, minimize that footprint. And in the case of troubleshooting tools, it's worth noting that Fargate does not let you Docker exec onto any task anyway. So putting them in the image is just not required or helpful. Also, always use known and trusted base images. And then also, when you want to protect against zero-day vulnerabilities, when you're trying to scan for common vulnerabilities and exposures, you can also check out partner products such as Aqua Security and Twistlock as well. All right, everyone. So that was a condensed view where I tried to get a lot of related services together talking about security. Again, my email, kbotcher@amazon.com, my Twitter handle @canal732, LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you want to have more in-depth conversations, anything where I can send you more information or anything like that. Feel free to let me know. I will send these slides to Ron right after this, and whenever that's posted, you can check that out as well.
That was absolutely fantastic. Again, like Kieran's talk, you got to watch Kunal's video about 5 or 6 times afterwards, because every time you watch, you'll pick up a new snippet. I was writing down all these 3-letter acronyms. I lost track of all of them. But what the premise is that AWS is doing so much behind the scenes to make your life easier and giving you the flexibility to then focus on how do you architecture your applications. And even if you're not a developer, this kind of information is critically important, because the people traditionally in the infrastructure, network, and security side, you have to work more closely with developers, and you have to understand all this functionality.